Mr. Gianetti's team, though.
Okay.
Yeah, I would, and maybe, Chris, what we could do is, I think similar to last time, a couple of them I told them to text me. Our engineer, as well as one of our other witnesses, so I think Matt Taylor and Josh Klein should be hopefully joining within 10 minutes. So I can either send you a private message or something to say, hey, they're in the waiting room or something like that.
Okay.
If you want to let them in.
Yeah,
We have a couple of things to do in the meantime, so it'll probably take maybe about 10 minutes, Mr. Gianetti.
Okay.
So we'll, I guess we'll call the meeting to order now that everyone is here. I'll read the adequate notice statement. Adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by the board in preparation of the 2020 annual meeting notice, which sets forth the date, time, and place of this meeting, and by properly posting such notice and forwarding the notice to those designated newspapers and persons requesting meeting notices. Moreover, in order to comply with the national and state declarations of emergency related to the COVID-19 pandemic and in accordance with the municipal land use law, the Open Public Meetings Act, and the recent operational documents from the Department of Community Affairs, this meeting is being held virtually as a web-based platform with remote public access. So for those of you on the call, if you look over my left shoulder, over my right, look, my right shoulder looks like my left in the camera. There is a flag up there and a New Jersey flag behind it. So that's what we've been using in the past for our Pledge of Allegiance. So let's start our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United
States of America,
and to the republic
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
visible
indivisible,
with
with
liberty and justice
for all.
Okay, great, thanks. On the agenda tonight, Mr. Nicola, we didn't have a little slot for the meeting minutes, so I thought I'd take this point in the meeting to just see if anyone had any comments on the meeting minutes from, actually, these go back, is this right to August 24th? Is that right, Chris? Or is this?
Mr. Chairman, I would just call the roll first.
Oh, yeah, sure, sorry. I got too excited about the meeting minutes.
Problem. Chairman Anderson,
Present.
Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff,
Present.
Councilmember Little,
Here.
Ms. Paulson Alvarez,
Here.
Mr. Drummond is recused, Ms. McNeil,
Here.
Mr. Delory,
Here.
Mr. Zucker,
Here.
Mr. Perrella,
Here.
Mr. Fiore,
Here.
Mr. Formicelli.
Here.
For the record, Mr. Warner is here. You have a quorum. You can proceed.
So back to the minutes. Chris, is this correct that it is August 24th meeting minutes, or are we September meeting minutes?
I believe this was the August 24th because
Okay.
we had a special meeting right before that, and then we had a subsequent meeting 4 days after that.
Okay, I just want to be sure that that's correct. And anyone have any comments or questions on the minutes before I give Chris a couple of mine? Comments, questions, additions, deletions? Okay, so Chris, on the first page under Primrose School Franchising Company, sorry, Mr. Drummond recused from this application. I don't know what Mr. Drummond requested being recused from this application or has been recused from the application. Maybe something needs to go in there between Drummond and recused.
Okay.
And on the second page, I'll give you a second to look at that. I'm sorry. That's on the second page. About halfway down in the first big paragraph at the top of the page, it says, Mr. Klein stated that the applicant is providing some landscape buffering of 15 feet per setback requirements. Is that the number? The 15 feet is the right number?
That's what was testified to.
Okay, all right, good, okay. And then on the top of the third page, which begins, Mr. Casay stated that at the corner, and I think we're really talking about the corner of Webster and Morris. Can we just, if that's correct, if that's the corner we're referring to, maybe we could just be a little more specific so we have that there?
Sure.
Okay. And then, Mr. Perrella, you had asked a question in an email regarding the last sentence of the DRO. And I believe Mr. Cole has responded to you with regard to that, and that I believe that should be sufficient. Do you have any more questions regarding that aspect? And what I'll read for the board as after discussion. This is under the DRO update breweries and the CRBD. After discussion, the board decided to limit breweries in the CRBD to having a limit of 3,000 square feet of pop production area and 1,000 square feet or more of seating area. This was what was said in the meeting. So the meeting minutes, what was reflected in the meeting, but it's not exactly what ended up in the DRO. And
Yeah, I just, Mr. Chairman, I don't remember that we set, I remember we set the 3,000 foot limit on production because we did not want breweries in the CBD to become distribution, and we wanted them to be outside of it. I don't remember that we had a discussion on that there had to be a minimum square footage for seating, and the language with the 25%, I don't think works because a lot of the floor plates in town are in that 3,200 to 4,000 foot range. And if somebody has 3,000 square feet of production, they can't have a minimum of 25% of seating area. So I think we've restricted their ability to operate. I thought we discussed that we only wanted to keep 3,000 as a minimum. And in the downtown, if they wanted to be in a 7,000 foot building and they thought they would get enough foot traffic, they would get enough. But I don't see why we're limiting that they have to have a minimum. They won't fit in some of the floor plates.
I guess the question is, and it's sort of a funny way to put this, but we moved it off to the subcommittee. This is what the subcommittee came up with, and that's currently what's in the DRO. At this point, I don't know that we're really able to make a change to that. We could make a change in the future potentially, but we might be able to make a change to that. But
Can I ask a question in that regard then?
Yeah.
So I don't understand if the whole board discusses limiting it to 3,000 feet and then it goes to a subcommittee, shouldn't it come back to us before we approve that?
In effect, it has. So let's table this issue. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Let's table this issue and talk about it a little bit more. And I'll tell you why I'm suggesting we do that. With regard to the DRO, we had talked about it coming to the planning board. This next item on the agenda, coming to the planning board for essentially stating that it's consistent with the master plan. We've had a little bit of a snafu with regard to scheduling so that the DRO essentially won't come to the planning board until a month from now. So to answer your question, Andy, we have a little time to adjust this. And so let's talk about it some more. We spent a lot of time on this. I don't want to spend more time on it tonight, but let's address it. We have the opportunity to address it because we've gotten a little bit more time than we would have had tonight. So I'd like to go on to ask Steve to talk a little bit about the next two items, item 6 and item 7 on the agenda.
Before we do, Mr. Chairman, but we still do need to motion second and adopt the minutes
As amended.
as
Yes.
amended.
Okay, that's a good idea. So someone give us an emotion with regard to the meeting minutes.
So moved.
And a second, please.
Ellen, you're muted.
Second.
There we
All
go.
right, thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none. Okay.
All right, great. All right, thanks. Steve, can you give us an idea of what you're thinking with regard to items 6 and 7? And then I'd like to do a little introduction prior to the public hearing after that.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, with respect to item number 6, the applicant Cardone Contracting, Inc., 83 Maple Street, has submitted a request to withdraw their pending application without prejudice, meaning that it could potentially be rebrought, but at least for now will not be. So in standard practice and best practice, to have a resolution of the board just recognizing that the application was withdrawn or dismissed without prejudice and any conditions associated therewith. We have a 2-page resolution that does just that. Actually, it's probably 1 1/4 pages at most. And the only condition is that they replenish any escrows if they have any deficiencies in their escrow account. And I would just ask the board to accept the withdrawal without prejudice of the application. It will come off our case calendar, so to speak, no further carrying, what have you. And in the event they bring it in the future, so be it. So that would be item number 1, Mr. Chairman. If anyone has any questions or wants to make a motion, a second to adopt the resolution to withdraw and dismiss without prejudice.
Anyone have any comments or questions or additions, deletions related to the resolution? Any member of the board? All right, can I have a motion to approve?
Moved.
Motion to approve.
And a second, please.
Second.
Great, thank you.
And that would be a roll call, Mr. Chairman, since it's a resolution.
All right, Chris?
Chairman Anderson,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff,
Yes.
Councilmember Little,
Aye.
Ms. Paulson Alvarez,
Yes.
Ms. McNeil,
Yes.
Mr. Delory,
Yes.
Mr. Zucker,
Yes.
Mr. Perrella,
Yes.
Mr. Fiore,
Yes.
Mr. Formicelli.
Yes.
Actually, technically, Chris, we'd stop at the 9.
Oh, okay, yeah, sorry.
Okay, no problem. And then Mr. Chairman, with respect to item number 7, there were recently enacted regulations. As we all know, we've been operating remotely for some time now, pursuant to, initially pursuant to nothing other than the necessity of having to operate remotely. But at least since early April, if memory serves me correctly, we received our guidance operational guidance document from the Director of Local Government Services of the Department of Community Affairs. And we have been operating under those guidance documents. Now, as of very recently, pursuant to an implementing statute, enabling statute. Now I got it. An enabling statute. The Director of Local Government Services of the DCA promulgated regulations to govern how to, for all public bodies, how to proceed with remote public access meetings. And they are consistent with the way we've always been doing them. But one of the additional obligations now is for each public body to adopt regulations summarizing those procedures. So of course, to be 100% in compliance with the regulations, we've prepared a resolution for this board, which essentially summarizes the protocols for remote public access for public body meetings, particularly land use boards and our planning board, and focuses primarily on public participation and public comment. So that is what's before the board for adoption. I would hope the board can adopt them. Certainly, if there's any questions, comments, concern, I'm more than happy to address them. But once adopted, that will put us 100% in compliance with those new regulations.
So, Mr. Warren, I understand that these are very similar to things that are being used by many other municipalities in the state, and essentially it's kind of a roadmap that most municipalities are using at this point.
Yeah, certainly, in my opinion, and I'll only speak for the municipalities I represent, but certainly, if asked, it applies to all public bodies. So certainly our board, and as I understand it, the other land use board will be adopting the same or similar. And if I understand correctly, the governing body, if it hasn't already done so, will be adopting something that's similar. But the rules are a little bit different for public bodies that don't have quasi-judicial, as we've talked about in the past, aspects to them, where we have administrative hearings. For example, we have hearings on, of course, land development applications. So ours are a little more extensive. But be that as it may, these are consistent, in my opinion, with the new regulations. And as I said before, once adopted, we can check off that additional obligation, which is to have a resolution summarizing the regulations for our protocols.
Any comments or
And
questions?
just to be clear, this doesn't change any of the procedures that we've been going through for the last month or two. Is that a fair statement?
I would
Or
say that's
process.
a fair statement, correct.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions of Mr. Warner? Mr. Warner, I assume we need to vote on this.
It would be a motion, second, and a roll call vote for adoption of the resolution, as with all resolutions.
May I,
9 members, quote unquote, regular members.
okay, may I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
Oh, thank you. All right.
Okay,
Mr. Nicola?
Chairman Henderson,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff,
Yes.
Councilmember Little,
Yes.
Ms. Paulson Alvarez,
Yes.
Ms. McNeil,
Yes.
Mr. Delory,
Yes.
Mr. Zucker,
Yes.
Mr. Perrella,
Yes.
and Mr. Fiore.
Yes.
All set there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I guess a couple of things, Mr. Giannetti. Have your consultants arrived yet?
I see Matt Taylor has been added to it. Josh Klein, who was our civil engineer, doesn't believe he's come yet, but he's not going to be necessarily testifying tonight. So it's more just to observe.
Okay, gotcha. So as I understand it, Mr. Giannetti, just to be sure, just sort of set some guidelines for tonight, but I want to be sure I have them correctly. It's your intent tonight to have your planner and traffic engineer, Mr. Keller, sort of present this concept plan, if I can use that term, that was sent to us. And that you're seeking basically the board's and the board's professionals' input on it. And we wouldn't be opening that up necessarily for public questions. Following that, we would have Mr. Taylor testify regarding operations. And at that point, at the end of his testimony and end of the board's questions and the planning board professionals' questions, we would open that testimony up for questioning from the public. Is that consistent with what you're planning on doing tonight?
Yeah, in part, Chairman. And again, good evening, Chairman, members of the board, Craig Giannetti, the law firm Dave Pitney, on behalf of Primrose School Franchising Company. So I think this evening, what our plan is first to finish the public questioning of our architect. I believe there's a handful of members of the public that didn't get a chance, so they will have the opportunity this evening if they're still on.
Yeah, sorry, I left that piece out. I apologize. Yes, that would be the first thing that we would do, and Mr. Nicola has kept a list of those folks.
Yes, and then the next step, following the October 14th meeting, where we obviously have had a lot of input from the board members as well as from the public, our team has gone back and looked at making plan revisions to the site plan. And so as part of that, we obviously, being that October 14th was the last meeting, we couldn't get anything on file 10 days prior, but we wanted to at least present conceptually what we have looked at as for a plan revision. And I just want to make sure everyone's hearing me clearly because I'm hearing a little feedback. You guys hear me fine? Okay, thank you.
I think so.
Okay, good. So we wanted to present conceptually what we're looking to do. We're going to be revising the site plan and submitting it, and obviously get some initial feedback from the board and the board professionals. Understanding it, you're just seeing this exhibit when it was uploaded, I believe, Friday for the first time. And then, I think we can discuss at that point, once we finish that presentation, we would eventually get into the planning, traffic, and operations testimony, but whether or not that makes sense to go through it tonight, since we're going to be submitting a revised site plan, presumably based upon the concepts we're going to show you tonight. So I think we're going to play it by ear what comes after Mr. Seckler, our planner, who will testify to these conceptual changes. And then, but we obviously understand we're going to have to come back for another meeting to get the plans on file 10 days prior and allow the board, the public, and the board professionals an opportunity to review it. I believe you're on mute, Mr. Chairman.
I wanted to be sure that background noise wasn't coming from my home here. So if I understand you correctly, after this presentation, you'll, I guess, make a call as to whether you think it should be open up to the public, or what are your thoughts on that? I guess what I'm
Mr. Seckler, who's going to be testifying as to the changes, he'll provide testimony at the next meeting in more detail as to the actual plan, as well as the variances and the traffic testimony associated with the revised plan. So I don't think it's necessary or would be helpful to open up to the public this evening. It would be open up to the public at the next hearing where he actually presents the full testimony.
Okay, good. I just want to be sure that members of the public understand what our process will be tonight. And so thank you for reminding me, Mr. Giannetti. The first thing we will do is Mr. Nicola will call on the folks that were unable to speak and ask questions as related specifically to the architect's testimony, Mr. Casay's testimony. And I would ask the members of the public who are on as well, if you may ask the question of Mr. Casay last week, please just let the individuals that are in line ask the questions that they have. And the individuals that are in line, if a question has been asked that's basically the same as yours in front of you, if you could not ask that question, it would help us move along quickly. However, if there's something you really do want to ask, please don't hesitate to do so. We're happy that you're here. So I think we'll have this presentation. We'll do the questions with the architect. We'll have the presentation from Mr. Seckler regarding the concept plan revisions. We'll roll into a presentation on operations from Mr. Taylor. And at that point, questions from the public can be directed to Mr. Taylor as it relates to operations. And I'm assuming, Mr. Giannetti, questions related to the revised plan and traffic, you want to hold those questions from the public until next meeting. Is that fair?
That is fair. And there is, depending upon the comments received from the board and the board professionals on the this conceptual revised exhibit, which we'll have Mark and present, we may ask for a minute just to talk amongst ourselves, whether it makes sense to present Mr. Taylor this evening on operations or just also save him for the next meeting, as his testimony might relate to what the revised concept plan as well, or the revised site plan as well.
Okay, that seems to make sense to me. Mr. Warner, anything you would add to that?
Nope, I just, I want to make sure we formally called the case, Mr. Chairman, even though it's on the agenda, everybody knows it,
yep,
but, and then we should just proceed with the questioning, and I know we have the list of those individuals who are waiting to ask questions, who presumably some or all of them are here tonight.
All right.
Again, questions of the architect based solely on the architect's direct testimony provided.
Yeah. All right, great. So, all right, we're down to item 8 on the agenda, which is the public hearing for Primrose School Franchising Company at 480 and 490 Morris Avenue. If it's okay with you, Mr. Giannetti, we'll have our board secretary open up the questions for Mr. Casay and his previous testimony, architect testimony from the last meeting of October 14th.
And Mr. Chairman, I just want to say Mr. Casay remains under oath. He was sworn in at the last hearing.
Okay. All right. Mr. Nicola?
Okay, going in order from the first hand raised from the last meeting is Jennifer Ting. If Jennifer Ting is present, please raise your hand. I only see one hand raised. It's a Samsung SM, looks to be a phone number, G9OU. Not sure if that's Miss Ting, but
Should you check it out and see?
yeah, we'll call it in. And we're just waiting on mute now.
So it looks like Samsung-SM is off mute.
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Could you identify yourself and give us your address, please?
Peter Sabello. It's S as in Sam, O, B as in Baker, ILO, 11 Greenfield Avenue in Summit. And on the drawings, there's just a couple of issues, minor issues that I wanted to raise.
Before you do, sir, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure, obviously, this is not Jennifer Ting, but I take it, Mr. Chairman, that you'll be accepting questions of individuals who did not already ask questions, even if they weren't awaiting to ask questions at the end of the last meeting?
I guess I would like to limit that to, this gentleman, we don't want to cut him off, but what we were trying to do is to make a list at the end of the evening on the 14th. Those people that hadn't had a chance to ask questions would have a chance to ask questions. So I don't want to shut anybody out who has not had a chance to ask questions. And I guess we thought that this was related to the phone call. Let's just stop for a second here. Chris, were you able to reach anyone on that phone?
Well, this was the phone number that we had its hand raised.
Okay, all right. So let's begin with this member of the public, and then we'll go to any other members on the list.
Okay, and again, these are questions of Mr. Casay, the architect, Mr. Sabello, based on his testimony, okay?
Okay. They're not really architectural questions per se.
Well, then that's what this is. If you have comments to make, that's at the public comment portion at the end of the evidence presented by the applicant.
And there will be future traffic and planning testimony later.
Right.
Okay, will that be tonight or at a future meeting?
That's probably going to be at a future meeting, since we'll be presenting a revised plan, and then there'll be planning testimony and traffic testimony on the revised site plan.
Okay, let me just say what I have to say, and you can decide whether it's for future or not.
All right, okay. Sure.
It has to be a question, sir. Go ahead. Questions.
On a couple of the drawings, specifically on drawing RE-1, it says view from Morris Road looking southeast. There is no Morris Road. It's Morris Avenue.
Yeah, okay.
And that applies to several of the drawings where they have them listed as roads versus avenues. That's the only point I'm bringing up, so that they can get that revised. That it doesn't have to be revised and postpone another meeting to get revised architectural drawings in.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Sabella. I appreciate that. I'm sure they'll make that correction. Any other questions related to the architect's testimony?
No, that's it. That's the only thing I had.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. I know this is a process that's a little bit trying because we have to keep discipline and ask questions of each witness as presented. So it tends to make these things run a little bit longer, but thanks for hanging in there with us. We appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Nicole, anyone else on that list perhaps that is signed in here?
I'm looking now. I don't see Jennifer Ting in here, so I guess we'll move on to our next on the list, which is Laura Lameo, and her hand is already raised.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening. Paul, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Good. Paul Lameo, 9 Webster Avenue here in Summit.
Okay,
So-
what's your question for the architect?
I have a question for you, Mr. Warner, on procedure, a procedural clarification. If the plans are being amended or revised, does this start over again?
No, it does not. It happens often in land development application hearings. And my understanding is the architectural drawings are not being revised. So the testimony that was provided by the architect presumably remains relevant. So any questions you have for the architect, now would be the time to ask them.
Great. Okay, good. Perfect. Thanks. So 3 quick questions. I'm going to tie them all into my questions as they relate to the master plan. The first, let's start with, on plan picture RE1. Right. So if I'm reading the plans correctly while we call that up, the line, which I'm going to call it the foundation of the building, right, is roughly 7 feet 6 inches from street level to the right on our to that white line, right, which is the equivalent of what I would call like a foundation.
At the corner, the grade goes up as you go down Webster, but at that corner, it's approximately 7'6". Yes.
Yeah. So if I was going to make two analogies to the foundation of this building, I guess the first would be a standard garage door is roughly 7 feet. So is it a safe analogy to say that that foundation line would be 6 inches above a standard garage door in a residential house? Probably, right? I mean, 7'6" versus 7 foot.
If the garage door is 7 feet, then yes.
Okay. Right. And then I was trying to count. So that, and again, is it the right analogy to draw that that would be a roughly 11 cinder blocks? I know it's going to be more architecturally, appealing than cinder blocks, but if it was an 8-inch cinder block, that whole corner below that white line is going to be roughly 11 cinder blocks high, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then I just couldn't see this on the plans. On the corner rendering, how many from the white line of the foundation up until, I don't know if it's a porch overlooking Webster Avenue, the intersection there, how many more cinder blocks would it be from that white line up to that perch or I don't know if it's a porch or a window? Is that another 4 to 5 cinder blocks?
Are you talking to the top of the fence line?
No, I'm sorry. On RE1, there's like right on the corner looking out into the intersection, right? It looks like it's almost like a porch. It's below the Primrose sign.
Where the windows are?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it'd be another four blocks, so 32 inches.
Okay. So I guess, so if I wanted to have perspective, my perspective would be if I stacked 15 cinder blocks and stood next to it, that's what it would be like if I was that individual on the phone, I guess, next to the stop sign?
Yes.
Okay. Got it. So I guess, right, I'm 5'8", so that would be 5'9" with new shoes. But all right, so that would be roughly 3.5 to 4 cinder blocks above my head, just an average person walking down the street, from that. Okay. I'm just thinking, again, perspectives of the shore where all the houses are elevated, garages are under the house, right? If the house, the front porch is roughly 8 feet, 7 foot, 6 inches up in the air, to do that. And I was just trying to tie that into the objective 210 of the master plan of consistent application of design in neighborhood business zones. If that's a consistent application of design. Is that something that, I don't know if that's an architectural question, like, do you look at the consistency of design as when you design the buildings? Is that an architectural or an engineer? I don't know if that's an architectural or an engineer.
We do.
Okay.
It's an architectural question.
All right. And in your opinion, do you feel that that's the consistent application of the design in the neighborhood business zone?
I do.
Okay. Then the second question is, again, around just the pedestrian experience, because again, right around objective 301 of the master plan is the pedestrian improvements. So it was, I guess someone testified in the last meeting that the water will be gathered from the playground in the back and will be discharged onto Morris Avenue, right? It was someone testified that no water would be discharged into the neighbor on Webster Avenue, that all wastewater will be discharged. So on where are the pipe, or like where in these plans, and I know you didn't, right, where would it be fair, or is all the wastewater from the parking lot and the playground, where will that be discharged? Is that discharged onto the sidewalk, or will it be discharged onto the road itself?
It's not wastewater, it's stormwater, and it's all underground and ties in to the storm system underground.
Oh, so it's going to go directly into the sewage system?
There's a drain on the playground. Everything drains to that. It's all handled underground.
Okay, so no surface discharge of the water, even at when the retaining facility overflows?
Yeah, it's sized and designed to not overflow, but yes, it's.
Just if I may, Mr. Warner, that's more of an engineering question as opposed to an architectural question.
But wouldn't we have to? Well, I don't know if that's your position to say that or if it's the chairman's, but isn't it important because if there's pipes that have to go from the playground to Morris Avenue, isn't it an architectural question how the pipes will get through the building to Morris Avenue? Or is that an engineering question as well?
It's all site designed by the civil engineer, so it's not in the building. It's all outside underground and ties into existing storm structures.
Okay. So I guess just for the board, that's inconsistent with the testimony that was given at the last meeting. So if that's the case, there's some incorrect testimony at the last meeting where the town engineer said someone testified to him that the excess rainwater would be discharged onto Morris Avenue. And that's at 1 hour and 41 minutes in the last meeting's recording.
I think that was referenced to the, sorry, I think that was referenced to the storm sewer is at Morris Avenue. So the pipe connects to the storm line that's running underneath Morris Avenue.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. Okay. I heard it differently, but that makes more sense. Okay. Thank you. And then the last one, just around, again, master plan objective 208, just the quality of signage and detailing. So the backlit signs, are they like plastic, like big plastic signs like we'd see at a gas station or McDonald's? Because there's 5 of them, right? There's 5, I guess it's rear illuminated signs. Are they all like big plastic round McDonald's type signs?
There's three signs and they're an acrylic sign.
Okay. So there's one, I guess I counted 5. So RE1, there's one there, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's on that intersection.
Right.
Then if you go to RE2, there's another one above the exit door.
Right.
Right. And then there's the cornerstones. Is it the cornerstone or the marquee sign?
Oh, are you talking about the monument sign, the separate
sign?
Yeah,
the monument.
Yeah. So yes, there's one on either side of that. So that's
4. And then is there one in the parking lot as well?
Yes.
So I got 5 big plastic.
Yeah, including the monument sign. That's correct.
Yeah. So I guess why would there be consideration, or is it necessary? Let me phrase it as a question. Is it necessary to have them as big plastic illuminated signs versus maybe something more architecturally pleasing, like we have down at the promenade, where you have the wooden sign, an etched wooden sign with like a light that shines upon it? Is it necessary to have 5 big plastic signs? I know it was also testified that the signs will go off at 6:30 p.m. But is there any, I guess, is it necessary, or is that something that's also feasible under the situation?
That's what Primrose typically use. That's what they prefer, but I don't know that they wouldn't be open to an alternative idea.
Okay.
With light.
That's all. Okay. I mean, that's all. I just wanted to make sure the way I was reading the plans correctly with that. Okay. That's all the only things I wanted to that I wanted to clarify and then tie them into the master plan. So thank you for your time, and thank you to the board and for everyone for all your time answering my questions.
Thank you for being here and hanging in with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And next is Douglas Levine. If you're here, please raise your hand. Okay, good.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just had a quick question with regards to the illumination in the parking area.
If you could just give us your address first, please.
I'm sorry, Douglas Levine, 32 Montrose Avenue.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Good evening.
Good evening. So quick question, it has to do with the parking and the lighting. In the parking lot area, will there be any illuminated poles? And will there be any illumination coming off of the building? And if so, at what point do they turn off?
The street poles are, it's really a civil engineer question. I believe they're, I don't recall how many, I believe they're all existing locations. On the building, there is, there's some building lighting along the Morris Avenue elevation. I believe it's, let's see, there's three wall sconces on the Morris Avenue side. There's some under roof recessed ceiling lights under that canopy along this along Webster Road that are concealed by the perimeter beams, and then there's some three lights in the back of the building, wall lights, and those will be the same hours. They'll be off at 6:30.
They're not motion activated or anything like that. They're just at 6:30 they turn off.
Yes, they're on a time clock.
And that's the same thing with any parking poles as well? Any illuminated poles?
I don't know the answer to that on the parking lot poles.
The only reason why I bring that up is because I've lived in places before where you have these large poles that are illuminated, and they're like floodlights. They're very bright, and sometimes they turn off, but usually they're actually on. I don't know if it's for emergency purposes or I don't know why they're on, but they tend to be on all night long, even though no one's in the parking lot. So that was my question. That's it. Thank you.
And I believe that everything there was.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Giannetti, does the applicant stipulate as condition of approval, should the application be approved and should the board so desire, to only security level lighting after 6:30 p.m. or a particular hour?
Yeah, that'll be fine. Obviously, there'll be some security lighting for probably the office tenant as opposed to the daycare center, but also to I think at the last meeting there was testimony as to the the type of shields on the lighting and things of that nature to avoid spillage, and I believe shown on the lighting plan that we comply with the lighting requirements with respect to foot candles at the property line and things of that nature.
I'm sorry.
Right, as far as security level lighting only for this applicant, excuse me, for this member of the public and all the members of the public, is the applicant stipulating to, after a particular period at a particular hour, security level lighting only?
Yes.
And what is that hour?
I will confirm what that time will be.
Okay, because it was well, okay. We'll get that confirmation. I'm sorry, Mr. Levine, I was trying to help you.
No, I
please
appreciate.
go back.
I believe the testimony was 7. I just need to confirm that.
I appreciate that. Mr. Warner, maybe you can answer this question. What is security level lighting? Is there like a certain type of illumination? It's a little not as bright. What does that mean?
That's about as good as an attorney can explain it, certainly, or at least this one can, but I would defer to the engineers, but I've always understood it to be a sufficient level of lighting for security, i.e. safety purposes. You don't want it completely dark because that could be counterproductive. But I'll leave it to the engineers, but generally it's subject to the review and approval of the municipal engineer as to what would constitute security level lighting. In my experience.
Proposed to comply with that. Those ordinance would cover what you're referring to as security lighting and what I'll just call anything other than security lighting. So those are well covered, I would say, if this proceeds, to clarify and to manage the lighting that spills off the property. It's standard within our lighting ordinance. I hope that's helpful.
And there's, Mr. Levine, there's a measurement as it relates to the amount of light that's allowed to spill off the property line, and it's very de minimis. So the standards are pretty rigorous, and the height of the poles is controlled as well. So if you go back to the 1960s, you're not going to have a 30-foot pole in the middle of a parking lot illuminating the whole neighborhood. The current lighting ordinance is intended to control that for the neighbor's benefit.
Yeah. The applicant proposing a 15-foot high light fixture.
Okay. Yeah.
That helps you.
Okay, and I guess my last question would be, if the light after if it gets approved and the building is put up and there's a 15-foot pole of light, and a neighbor, happens to notice that the security light is shining into their house or their bedroom or whatever it is there, what's the, what can be done to, mitigate the light that comes into the home?
As I understand it, Department of Community Services has an enforcement group, and that would be brought to their attention. And if it's in violation of what we've approved here tonight, it has to be rectified.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Levine. So, Mr. Nicola, anyone else on the list there that's present tonight?
Yes. Next is Michael Enos. Please raise your hand, Michael, if you're here. I saw his name in here, so I think he's here. Let's see. There we go.
Okay.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you state your name, Mr. Innes, and your address for us?
Sure. This is Michael Innes, INNES. I live at 23 Webster Avenue.
Great. Thanks. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. If I could look at floor plan 1, FP1, can we bring that up?
Where is that?
Jim, you're able to share that, right?
Yeah, I'm getting.
FP 1.0.
All right, can you see that?
Yeah, if you could blow up the table in the top right-hand corner.
Okay.
All right, I want to look at, let's see if I can. So I'm looking at the proposed room capacity column. And
okay.
That totals to 200. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Now let's look at the max group size. Is that the max group size that's permitted by New Jersey state law for that type of facility?
By New Jersey state child care licensing regulations.
Okay. And what's the total for that column? I don't see that on the graphic.
I don't know. I don't have the total.
It's 224. So the total size that could be accommodated by this facility is 224 students. Is that right?
No.
Why is that not right?
The state licensing standards permit a max group size based on a number of children and staff. So while we could, in theory, have a larger group size, we're also, there's another factor that goes into the square footage of the classrooms. And our rooms are sized to the 200 capacity. We do not have additional capacity in room area, classroom area, where it could be increased at any point in the future.
Okay, I'm not sure I really understand that because that's not what's represented in the graph. I mean, are you willing to stipulate that you will not go over the 200 for total students?
Max group size is a state child care licensing regulation. So you're permitted to have, say, 20 children in the early preschool room. In this design, we did not have square footage to support that capacity. So we have it designed, there's a square foot per child that goes into that calculation. So while the state regulation doesn't look at just our building, that applies everywhere. So we have not maximized all of the rooms based on the state capacity. This is a selective child mix and capacity that they feel works with the demographics, and that's
Right, but I'm asking an architectural question. I'm not asking a state licensure question. I'm asking whether or not that room could have a capacity of up to 12 students as opposed to the 8 that's proposed.
no, because it doesn't have enough square footage.
And what's the purpose of the max group size in this chart?
Because it's a state licensing standard. So you could create a room that is larger to accommodate that, but we are going underneath what the maximum.
What size? All right, so all right, we can now let's talk about licensure then. What is the max room size to accommodate 12?
It would be 12 times 35 square feet per child. So you would need, do that quick math. You would need 420 square feet.
And which room is A1 on this chart, this diagram?
That is can you see this?
Yep.
That's A1.
How many square feet are in that room?
421 square feet. So
so what are we talking about?
So the
you can do the math again if you want.
For the max group size, you have to have a ratio of children. So they have based this on one staff for 4 children. So you would need a third teacher to get that amount of square footage, or to get that amount of children, which is atypical for Primrose schools.
Right. So that's an operations question. I would think I'm being very careful in wording my questions so that they're architectural in nature, because I understand that that's what I'm allowed to do. I think I've made my point here, right? That, I mean, you're going to stand by the fact that that calculation was 420. So that's the max capacity that room could handle. Is that right? Dimensions of A1 are 420 or over 420.
It is. And
okay, no, that's fine. So let's go to can you take me to the elevation at A4-4.0? Okay. Actually, maybe I get ahead of myself. I'm looking for the elevation that is facing Morris Avenue. Might be, yeah, there we go. Where on this can you tell me is the New Jersey bus stop?
It is.
And this question is really not necessarily for you, but I just wanted to bring it up because I think you're the best person just to show this graphic. I just asked that the board keep this in mind when looking at the traffic study and the impact of Morris Avenue. And also just, to add some scale to the entire project, right? I mean, looks like a minivan, this looks like a sedan, and now we're gonna have a big bus in front of this. So I don't know if you can put your cursor on where you think that that bus stop is, that'd be helpful.
I have to look at the site plan.
It's just curious to me why that wasn't put into the actual elevation.
Why the bus stop wasn't put in?
Yeah.
It's
And this is I'm sorry, Mr. Ennis, referring to Morris Avenue, correct?
Yep, that's right.
So, Mr. McSay, maybe we can look at the street photos taken, there was two angles from Morris Avenue, and whether or not that shows a bus stop.
Yeah, you can't see it.
They can't see it,
Yeah.
so it's sort of consistent with your architectural rendering then. Is it just a sign?
Mr. Giannetti, with all due respect, I have a question posed to your expert right now.
Well, you're trying to clarify. You're making it sound like there's a bus stop there.
There is a bus stop.
With a structure, and why it's not shown on the plans.
No, I didn't say anything about structure. I said there's a bus stop.
That's what is insinuated.
Mr. Ennis, this is the chairman here. If you know where it is, maybe you could help us out and tell us where it is. That'd be helpful. This is taking a little bit more time than we need to take. Thank you.
Fair enough, Mr. Chairman. It's about halfway down the structure. I just want the board to bear that in mind when we're talking about queuing and the traffic, just to have an image in your head. I can move on to my next question. So it wasn't clear to me based on your testimony last week or last meeting, what the overall square footage of the daycare facility is. And in some of the documents I've read, it's 14,970, and in others I've read it's creeping over 18,000.
It's approximately 12,204 square feet.
Okay. Does that include the portion that I believe was?
I'm sorry, I misspoke there.
Yeah.
It's about 14,900 and change.
Okay. And if you added to that the portion of the office space that will be annexed to the daycare facility or to the school, I should say, for flex space, where does that bring the square footage to?
Adding the second floor?
I understand that there's some flex space that would be annexed to the daycare facility. Is that right?
You're talking about the second floor tenant, where part of it is for an office tenant and part of it would be for Primrose?
That's right. So what portion of that would be for Primrose?
I don't know the exact number. It approximately 2,000 or 3,000 square feet.
Okay, so that would bring the total square footage of the daycare to somewhere between 16 and 17, right?
Approximately.
Okay, or actually a little bit over 18. Mr. Kasay, when you were developing the plans for the facility, did you work in connection, if at all, with the traffic expert?
Yes.
And did you guys consult each other on the amount of parking spaces that would be needed based on the occupancy of the structure?
Yes.
And are you familiar with small office building section 7112?
Section 7112 of what?
I'm sorry, 712.
Of what are you referencing?
That's a good question. Parking Generation Manual, 5th edition.
I'm not directly familiar with that. No.
What's your knowledge, if any, of the amount of parking spaces that are needed for a building of this size?
It's limited. I mean, it's a conversation. I was part of the conversations with operationally Primrose and the traffic engineer. So it was not a direct result of anything.
Did your conversations make any assumptions about the need for off-site parking?
Say that again?
Did your conversations in design make any assumptions about the need for off-site parking?
I don't recall.
You don't recall, or it didn't? You didn't?
I don't recall. And I think this is really our traffic engineer is going to present this.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I'll have questions for that gentleman. But my questions are more directed towards how you all went about designing the site and whether or not you took into consideration the fact that the overall tendency of this structure can't be supported by the parking area.
Objection, that assumes a fact not presented. There's been no testimony or presentation that the structure can't address the parking need or demand.
I think I have a question pending.
And I have an objection pending.
Okay.
Well, look, that sounds like testimony for the traffic engineer.
Okay. So my last question is, on the height of the playground, it's raised above Webster Avenue in the back. You have to raise the grade from where the parking lot is now. Was there any consideration for not raising that grade? For instance, was there any
there's consideration, yes.
And why was it done that it needs to be raised above the current level?
For life safety and operational reasons, to keep it at the same level as the finished floor.
This is all the discussion we had about the meandering ramps last time, right?
Right.
Okay, all right, fair enough. And it's your contention that it needs to be at the same grade for safety purposes?
Yeah, because with infants and children that can't operate self-sufficiently, they would in an emergency would evacuate infants in an emergency crib. So it is preferable to move them around with, not saying it can't be done, but as minimal ramps and stairs as possible.
So that's a particular regulation or statute that you're drawing from, or is that just design?
No, it's not a particular regulation. It's subject to fire marshal approval, and it's a Primrose operational preference.
Okay.
That they make it.
Fair enough. That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any further questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ennis. Thank you for being here. Mr. Nicola, any more folks on our list of questioners for Mr. Casay?
The next person on the list was Kim McGovern. Let me see if she's here. I don't see her name listed. If she is here, please raise your hand. Okay, not seeing anything. Next is Peter Catone. And I also don't see his name here. We'll give him one more chance. Mr. Catone, if you're here, raise your hand. Okay, and next was Kristen Staub, who I actually believe asked a question at the last hearing. So I don't see her here either.
Okay.
Ms. Staub, are you here? Raise your hand if you are. Not seeing anything. And lastly, we have Nandita. And I do see one hand up. It doesn't match the name Nandita, but we do have a hand up for Ela Maiswis. And that would be the last hand, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so Mr. and Ms. Maiswitz, are you out there? You raise your hand?
I'll promote her. Hold on.
Yeah.
And we still have Mr. Ennis up on the screen.
Okay, yep, okay. Mr. and Ms. Maiswitz, I'm sorry, I'm not sure with your first name. Pardon me. Could you unmute and give us your name and address, please?
Sir?
Oh, there we are. Hello.
Can you see me now?
Okay. Are we, we've got.
We can't see you, but we can hear you. What's your name? What's your address, please?
28 Webster, and my name is Eva. Last name is Misiewicz.
Oh, sorry. I apologize for mispronouncing it.
It's okay. Everyone does it.
Thank you for being here. And do you have a question for this architect's testimony tonight?
I have last question. It's pretty simple. Just, asking how much time did you spend in Summit before the project actually got created?
We've made several trips to Summit and surveyed the building, and
Are you personally came here, or did you send someone?
I've been there twice, and I've had staff that have been there.
So how many hours? Did you go around the neighborhood?
The general area, yes.
What's the general area? Can you tell us which streets where you were there?
I don't recall all the streets, primarily up and down Morris Avenue. I don't recall the side streets.
Webster too?
Yes, within the property area.
Okay, so you didn't go to our location, which we are further from the neighborhood, and you didn't see all the kids playing right around and all the cars standing on the street on the Webster.
No, I don't recall your particular property.
Okay, just quick question. So thank you.
All right, okay, thank you very much. Okay, that concludes our questions for Mr. Cassay. And then I think Mr. Giannetti, if you're prepared, or whether Mr. Cassay has any summarizing points, we're prepared to have you move on to your next witness.
Sure. And I just wanted to address some of the questions as to the licensing and going through the chart and what the max capacity was, but what kind of operational capacity was. We have identified 200 as our maximum operation for children, students, whatever we want to identify them as for the school children. And we're comfortable with that as a condition of approval, that 200 is the maximum capacity for this daycare, childcare center.
I believe the board understands the stipulation offered by and on behalf of the applicant.
Great. And at this point, I would like to call Matthew Seckler.
Mr. Chairman, if I recall correctly, I swore in Mr. Seckler at a prior hearing. Is that? I'll have to swear you in to ask you that question, Mr. Seckler. But I believe I have, and you'll remain under oath.
Thanks. Thank you.
Mr. Seckler, if you can just give for the board your qualifications in the field of planning and traffic engineering.
Yes, my name is Matthew Seckler. That is Seckler. I'm a principal at Stonefield Engineering and Design. Our address is 92 Park Avenue in Rutherford, New Jersey. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey. I'm also a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey. I'm recognized as a professional traffic operations engineer by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which requires both an examination and experience. I have a Bachelor of Science from Union College in Schenectady, New York, and a Master's in City and Regional Planning from Rutgers University. I've been accepted before over 100 boards in the state of New Jersey as an engineer, and over probably 35 boards as a planner in the state.
And both your licenses are current?
Yes, they are.
Any members of the board have any questions of Mr. Seckler? Okay, Mr. Seckler, we recognize you as an expert witness.
And just for clarification, Mr. Chairman, that's both as a professional planner and as an engineer, specifically traffic engineering?
Correct.
Okay, good. Yep.
I just want to make sure that the chairman was recognizing you in both capacities. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Seckler, as I indicated at the beginning of the meeting, following the October 14th planning board hearing and a lot of the public comments and comments from the board members, the team went back and looked at a lot of the issues concerning the playground area, some landscaping, as well as a trash enclosure area, and the parking. And as part of that, the team revisited some of those issues. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And since that time, your office, in consultation with obviously Primrose and the civil engineer Josh Klein, prepared a conceptual plan showing some proposed modifications, which will obviously be fully engineered and resubmitted to the board. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So maybe if we can have marked as A7 an exhibit that's been uploaded to the planning board's website. I believe it's just identified as 10-23-20 exhibit.
Yep, and I will pull it up on my screen and share my screen now. And does everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and it's titled Red Line Site Plan Exhibit. And again, this was prepared by Stonefield Engineering Design, and we'd like to mark this A7 for descriptive purposes. It shows the black and white version of the site plan that this board has seen and heard testimony from my colleague Josh Klein. On top of that, we've put in red a number of proposed changes. And again, as was mentioned earlier, I'll be back to provide more detailed engineering, traffic engineering and planning testimony, but we just wanted to get the board and I guess the public, give them an understanding of some of the changes we're looking at as it relates to the site based on their comments. I'm going to start with one of the concerns we heard from the public was related to the trash enclosure and its proximity to the residential development behind on Gates Avenue. We've removed the trash enclosure, so there'll be no longer a trash enclosure backing up to the properties on Gates Avenue. What we will have will be a trash can area located along the entrance drive aisle. It will hold 4 normal trash cans and 2 recycling cans. These cans will be brought out at the time needed for pickup, and the trash truck, which is essentially which would basically come down the drive aisle. They would load up the cans into the truck, and the truck would exit via Gates Avenue, like other forms of all other forms of transportation to this site. So again, we will no longer have the trash enclosure located, the dumpster style trash enclosure located backing up within the residential buffer. Instead, we will have trash can enclosure and located closer to the building, not within the residential buffer. And again, when we provide the fully engineered design plans, you'll see details in terms of how this will be shielded and likely match the materials that you have on the building. But again, this is a red line sketch that we're looking to, again, provide the board some updates on, but we'll fully engineer and provide the details for the enclosure in the future. But this was one of the main concerns we heard from the board and public was related to this trash enclosure.
And Mr. Sheckler, with the trash, this alternative trash location area, and with the truck pulling up alongside it, do you anticipate that the truck would have to make any sort of backup movements where there would be beeping or anything along those lines?
No, it should basically be able to continue in a forward motion. It would be not unlike any type of residential garbage pickup on a street. It's just this would be internal to the site, where these cans would be tossed in at a fairly quick manner into the truck, and then it would continue on its route.
And that would remain private collection.
Yes.
With the Primrose of contract.
Exactly, private hauler. I meant in terms of the quickness of it, like a public pickup. But yes, this would be private hauler. We're not expecting any of the Summit trucks to need to service this site.
And then what else did you look at?
Absolutely. Next up, we heard concerns regarding the proximity of the parking area and to the residential zone in the rear of our site. Right now, and it was previously designed, I believe we're about 3.2 feet off of the property line with the edge of our parking lot. We had proposed a solid fence along the back, and there was extensive testimony and photos showing how the new fence would look better than the existing fence that may be in disrepair out there. However, we are looking to improve that as part of this red line sketch, and we will be moving that limit of disturbance to 5 feet off the property line, which will allow us to provide plantings in addition to the fence along the residential buffer line. So as part of our redesign, we modify the parking area, and in doing so, we're able to move that parking area further from the property line, improving on an existing condition and also improving on what we had originally proposed. So again, we are looking at a minimum 5-foot buffer area that allows for plantings as well as the fence, and again, realigns the parking area as part of this improvement. In addition, we actually able to get 1 additional parking space with this design. So we went from 40 parking spaces to 41. You'll hear probably extensive testimony at the next hearing regarding the justification for the parking variance and how our parking drop-off and pickup operations typically function. But again, we will be increasing our parking supply from 40 spaces to 41 spaces. Another improvement that we are making is the fence that separates the playground area from the landscape buffer and then the residential properties on Webster Avenue. We're actually moving that fence and reducing the playground area by 3 feet in depth. So we will be not having as deep of a playground. That fence, which I believe used to be wrought iron, will be replaced with a solid 6-foot high fence. We are looking at detailing a fence that does also provide some noise suppression based on comments we heard from the public. So again, the wrought iron fence or the open style fence will be replaced with a 6-foot high solid fence that will be have noise reduction qualities to it. In addition, by stepping this fence back 3 feet from the edge of the wall, we were also able to provide some plantings behind the fence so that any residents, when they're looking, if for some reason they would basically be seeing a landscaped area at grade and then a landscaped area on a wall, and then you'd have the solid fence with the playground equipment behind it. So again, we think this is a improvement from the comments that we heard that were related to concerns about noise in the playground and the fact that it was an open fence facing the residential area. So again, additional buffering, additional plantings, solid fence, and noise reducing. Lastly, the improvement we are making along the Webster Avenue side is that we are proposing green giant arborvitae plantings in the area along that frontage, again, to break up the way that the building looks from the Webster Avenue point of view. So again, a larger plantings in that area along the Webster Avenue frontage based on comments that we heard from the public as related to this application. So again, I know there'll be extensive testimony probably at the next hearing when these fully designed plans get submitted, but we wanted the board to see that we've heard a number of the comments raised by the board and the public as it relates to proximity in the garbage pickup, the proximity of the parking spaces to the residential property line, noise on the playground, visibility from the playground, and the way the building looks or the structure looks from Webster Avenue. So again, those were the changes that we are proposing as part of this red line sketch.
And Mr. Seckler, I guess just to clarify on the red parking area towards the left side of that area, it still shows some parking spaces, from the original plan. Those won't be spaces as part of a revised plan. It would be the red that would be the parking, correct?
Yes, where they conflict, it would be the red. Obviously, there's no changes to the spaces that are shown in black along the entrance driveway. But again, the area where there's conflict, basically all the spaces in the rear of the building, we'll be reworking them into these drive aisles that again provide for a total of 41 spaces.
And as part of the revised plan, we'll also identify areas for this parking, some that will be identified for the office tenant, some for Primrose employees, and then the others obviously for drop off. And just a general description. I know the plans will have more detail when submitted, but just a general description of that.
Yes, this was comments raised by, I think, the board engineer and a couple of other comments raised by the board and their professionals. There was a request that the 3 parking spaces that are parallel on the way out to Gates Avenue be restricted to employee only. I don't think we have any issue with designating them as employee only for the office use. In addition, likely these first 2 parking spaces entering on Morris Ave will be dedicated to the office user. Along the building frontage, the parking spaces, and again, I'm looking at Exhibit A7, to the right of the ADA stalls, those 6 spaces would likely be designated for drop-off pickup between the peak time periods of drop-off and pickup. The space that has the number 9, it will likely be an employee, probably the director space. That would be an employee space. And then a portion of the 11 parking spaces that face the residential area, those would be parking spaces, again, that would be designated for drop off and pick up between specific hours. And again, we'll go deeper into the operational testimony and then the parking and traffic testimony to discuss how many simultaneous drop-offs and pickups there would be, even in I would say a worst case scenario, and how we could still accommodate all of those drop-off and pickups in addition to the employee for the childcare and the employees for the office portion of the building. But again, the plan would be drop-off and pickup along these 6 spaces, basically immediately to the rear of the building, and then likely 6 of the spaces that face towards the residential zone, with the number 9 parking space being employee space, the 2 spaces closest to Morris Avenue, and then the 3 spaces along the exit aisle towards Gate Avenue would be assorted employee spaces. And again, considering we just designated a portion to be employee for drop off and pickup, it's likely that the remainder of the unsigned, or the spaces I did not speak of, would be used by employees of the childcare facility. And we'll get into the staffing counts at the next hearing, hopefully.
Thank you, Mr. Seckler. And I know, again, this is, other than seeing the exhibit uploaded, this is the first time the board members or board professionals are seeing it, but if they have any preliminary feedback or thoughts on the proposed changes.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Giannetti. Any members of the board have questions for Mr. Seckler?
I have a question.
So I have a quick question. Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
What's the red box near the rear of the building?
This, this was originally, there was a landscape planting, and I'll kind of zoom in. It's in light gray. We're just changing the size of the landscape kind of center planting. It's just landscape area.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Perrella.
Yes, Mr. Seckler, wouldn't it be easier to just mark all of the office tenant spaces and all of the employee tenant spaces, and then have everything else for the drop off and pickup?
We could do that as well. We could do that. And again, I think that's one of the reasons why we're presenting this to the board. And if when we make our resubmission, it'll likely include, little indications of signage or marking on pavement to indicate which spaces are for employees. And again, if we are silent on a space, I guess that could be drop off and pick up, or vice versa.
Yeah. But I think given that you know how many staff and you're going to allocate a certain amount to the office, like you said, with markings and drop off, it would be a lot easier to control the flow of the traffic if people sort of knew where they were going and not driving in and out, fighting for a spot. That's just an observation.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the one thing, and again, I don't want to get too much into the operational testimony because I want to leave the board and the public wanting for more at the next hearing. But that was good. Typically, again, if your daycare, you're using a daycare, you're coming every single day, after the first, week of class or week of the session, you typically know where to find your drop off and pickup. But again, I think that we definitely could provide those type of markings and signs as part of our formal resubmission, hopefully in the coming days.
Any other board members?
I have one question, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, Jay.
Mr. Seckler, since I first saw the site plan, I guess now months ago, I've been concerned about the few parking spaces right at the entrance. That is the entrance off Morris Avenue. Obviously, that is the only entrance. And looking at those spaces, My concern, of course, if it's someone is pulling out or backing out of those spaces, then no one else can come in. Now, you've addressed that just moments ago by identifying those as employee-only spaces. But nonetheless, and I can't offer a suggestion to help you. I'd like to, but I can't. That worries me because of the traffic volume we all know that exists on Morris Avenue. It's well known. And I hear what you said, and I'm glad you said that these would be employee only. But nonetheless, I'm troubled by the fact that they are so close to Morris Avenue, and any movements there could back up traffic coming into the property. Any thoughts, or can you give me any help with that?
Yeah, and again, I think that you and I had similar thoughts when reviewing this site plan. And again, that was why it is our goal to make that employee-only space so that it turns over. You're really only backing out of there likely once a day. Now, I had previously, as part of this evening's testimony, said that maybe that would be for the office user. Now that I'm thinking about it more, it might make sense, instead of the director space being down here at number 9, maybe up here where they're essentially, one of the last people leaving for the night, which means you won't have the incoming traffic or the steady incoming traffic of parents picking up. You'd basically, when this person leaves for the day, it's basically good night for the day for the childcare facility. So I think that perhaps finding the right employee to utilize this space so they're only backing up generally when the site is quiet, likely is the best solution here. So again, I'm happy we had a chance to have this conversation because again, I think this is a process that working through the board, we can come up with better solutions for, I'd say, some pre-existing conditions that may not be ideal, but I think could definitely be managed.
Thank you. We could also make that employee be the first person in the morning, would probably help too.
Well,
exactly.
Thank you for that response. Thank you.
Jay, to follow up on your point, I mean, the entrance to the space is around the back. In theory, you would probably want the first 7 spaces to be employees because they're not likely to be leaving at the peak drop-off and pickup times. So if the people are dropping their kids off, you certainly don't want them parking all the way on the side. And to Jay's point, even after the second car, if the third or the fourth car is backing up, given the amount of traffic on Morris Avenue, you're blocking the street. So you really ought to have the first 7 spots as employee spots. And after that should be all the drop off and pickup spots.
Yeah. And again, our intention is the drop off and pickup would be, we don't need all 20 spaces we just created in red here, but this is where the drop off and pickup is going to occur. And again, whether we sign it as the affirmative or sign every other space as restrictive, the point is to have the drop off and pickup in this portion of the
Okay. So, but again, just to reiterate, the first 7 spots along the side there where you're going to create the most amount of congestion should be employee spots and not the office spots, because the office tenants can come and go as they please.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, if
I might.
Please, yeah. Mr. Zek.
The first
This is
spot, what is the length of the side of the spot that's closest to Morris? You can see that the stripe is 18 feet on one side, but that other side is quite foreshortened, to Jay's point.
I'll have to get the measurement. It may be close to 18 feet because the 18-foot measurement, if you look, it doesn't actually include this little.
That's because of the angle. You can't.
Exactly. So it's possible that it's around 18 feet in depth, but I could definitely, again, as part of the redesign plan, I mean, I'm looking at this 16.8 dimension. It looks like it's approximately the same if I kind of swing it. So maybe between 16 and 17 feet would be my assumption there.
Right. So in picturing, and it's hard because, this doesn't have a car on here, but in picturing cars banking that turn and coming in, I just don't know if a car is really going to fit there. It's just awfully tight. And the whole idea of this person ever backing out would be difficult. But, anyway, that's all I had to say.
Is anyone aware of any existing issues with the current office in that space or using that space?
No, that
There-
space is existing, in other words, is what you're saying, Mr. Giannetti?
Yeah, that parking field is existing with the,
It is?
But not with the
Bill,
car
yes,
line.
that parking, that exists.
All right.
But not with the
Mr.
car
Chairman,
line.
All right, Mr. Zucker, please.
I'm sorry,
I
not
was
with
just,
the,
not with the lines.
Yeah,
no, there's,
I was,
I think there's a little hatch that runs along the side between the curb and the parking space in this area. But again, I think it's, as we redesign, it's possible, and we'll take a look at it. Perhaps these could slide down a tiny bit and we could make, reduce this hatch area a bit and just kind of push everything downward, plan sheet downward, and maybe get a little more separation and from the driveway itself.
I was just picking up on the point, Jay's point and all of their points. In terms of signage, we can say it's employee only, but I think you would need something even more affirmative that said, proceed ahead to drop off or something, to the point where you would really, through signage, strongly discourage anybody from stopping there. Because if it's an open spot, people will grab it anyway. You have to really be firm about it. And I think that's, I am worried about the backup onto Morris Avenue. That's my only point.
Thanks.
Mr. Seckler, where's the snow gonna go?
I think I'm going to provide a lot more testimony, but I'll give you the sneak preview that they're going to be planning on taking snow off site from this location. But again, I don't want to get too far into operations because there's another witness for that. And I probably have, I imagine, a whole night's worth of questions, answers, and direct testimony to discuss things like that.
You don't want to leave us short of anything.
I want to be invited back.
Yeah, don't worry, you will be.
Any other questions from the board, please?
I do, just real quick. And again, these could be, they're probably operational, so forgive me, but two things. First of all, when all these parents or caregivers of the children are dropping off at the care center in this back area down at the bottom here, is there staff present that will actually be observing what's going on? Because I would imagine a lot of people rushing to work and in that confined area might cause some issues.
Again, I think we could have extensive
Operational.
testimony on that. And again,
Okay.
I'm actually not upset you guys are asking the questions because it'll help frame our direct
next-
testimony.
Okay.
So I'm glad to hear what you guys are thinking,
Okay.
but I think it's better to separate that from the specific discussion here.
Okay, and also my next question, you're welcome to do the same thing, but perhaps when you discuss or get into operations, the difference between the capacity of a dumpster versus individual cans, because I know a family can fill 2 recycling bins in 4 days, not to mention how many kids that would do that. So the way you're smiling, I'm assuming that's an operations question. And also simultaneously, if next week we could hear, will the office also be sharing the same area where refuse is being put, recycling and waste?
Yep. Thank you
Until they're
for
operational.
all
Yep.
those things. Yep. But again, I've written them down so that we make sure we hit them in our direct testimony.
Okay, thank you.
Any other
Mr.
members of the
Chairman,
board?
I
Yes.
have a couple of questions. So again, this may be an operational question, but if you know the answer, it looks from this drawing that there's not an area for kind of a car line drop off. So is it that all the parents park in a spot and then get out of the car? There's not a kind of car line?
Correct. Everyone is walked in to the well, either walked into the building or, and again, you'll hear if there's questions specific to what's going on with COVID and their policies, you'll hear that as well. But it's always parked parents. It's not a drop-off line.
Okay, and then just so that we're clear about the process tonight, and maybe this is a question more for Chairman Anderson. So we are getting this revised plan. We're just taking a look at it, and there's some preliminary questions. So we are not taking public comment tonight, and the public comment will come at the next meeting when we get the full plans. Is that correct, Chairman Anderson?
Yes, that's correct. We're giving a little bit of feedback tonight, and then they'll revise the plans and resubmit them, and then they'll go through the formal review process of staff, and we'll get staff comments, and the testimony will occur next meeting.
And that staff comment will be available on the website for the public to review before the next meeting as well.
I hope it will be, Chris, right? We have a month basically for the next meeting, so yes, it should be.
Okay, I just want to make sure for the people that are listening on the call that they will have a chance to look over the plans and the comments and bring
Sure.
all their questions after the testimony at the next meeting. Okay.
So there's a, Chris, there's a time frame, upon which the applicant needs to submit these drawings, and I imagine it's relatively soon so that the review can be completed by staff and the board professionals to achieve what Ms. Little is saying, that they essentially get posted in time.
Well, what I would say is that, while the statute says 10 days, it would be most beneficial to give staff more time. So I would suggest getting the plans in as soon as possible so they can be posted to the website and all the staff comments can be generated.
Okay. All right. Mr. Giannetti heard that. I'm sure he's going to whip his consultants into shape.
I'm already sending him a text.
Anything else from the board before we go to the board professionals? All right. Let's see. So, Mr. Dorr, or have you got any comments perhaps? Or shall we ask Mr. Burgess to start with the comments from staff first, perhaps, and then Mr. Dorr?
Matt, I have three basic questions, and they've really all been touched upon. With respect to the parking spaces closest to Morris Avenue, what is the actual backup footage before you hit the sidewalk for that first space?
So from the first space to the property line, again, I'm just going to assume that the sidewalk looks like it starts just slightly after that, is approximately 9 feet. So you basically have 9 feet behind you, and then you would head towards
that proposed building where it's shown. What's the visibility as one backs out of that spot? As they see pedestrians on that sidewalk or cars about to make a right-hand turn into that driveway?
I think you have the visibility and we could review it. The building is actually, this is not the proposed building, this is the existing, so we could probably even mimic this and try it out in real life, one of these days. Because yep, we could take a look at that. Yep.
I mean, generally speaking, what is the typical engineering standard for the location of a parking space closest to a driveway entrance on a county road?
So the county does have standards. Trying off the top of my head, remember if it's 20 feet, they basically want from the curb line back, or if it's greater than that. But I will double check that prior to the next hearing. Again, the one thing is this is a kind of pre-existing condition, but I understand your point being that obviously, the goal is not to, and I think every member of the board kind of who at least spoke about this, touched on it, is to ensure that they are not impeding traffic as part of their, especially on Morris Avenue, as part of their maneuver in and out. And I think one thing we could do from a applicant who has a site that has this pre-existing condition is to see what we could do in terms of restricting the amount of times this potential backup maneuver would occur. So if it occurs one time a day and occurs outside of the time period when cars would be entering, that's obviously preferred over anything else. But again, we could review the sightline concern that you have with the building and then see what we could do to at least improve over the existing condition. Again, I think with some of the pre-existing nonconformities on the site, I think the threshold we're trying to see here is, although we may not be able to bring it into complete conformance, let's see if we can improve on it. So that could be one of the options here.
I noted your one suggestion about sliding things back a little bit, which I thought might help.
I don't know if you could use a compact space designation there or not, but that's maybe a possibility.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah, that's another idea.
Or designate the director as a compact car.
Nothing larger than a Volkswagen.
They get a company car. It's just smaller.
That's right.
Is the director really going to be the first one arriving every morning? I'm not sure.
He's going to need a mini.
Yeah. Okay.
I like Lori's comment about the trash enclosure change. We really do need, when you come back, or whoever's going to be, to testify about how much recyclable material and how much trash on a daily basis is gathered. And tie that in with how often the trash company is coming to the site to pick up.
Yep.
And the bigger issue is when vehicles make that right-hand turn into the back parking lot. Because there's going to be a lot going on there. As you said just a moment ago, everybody's got to pull into a parking space, take their kid out of, or kids out of the car and walk them to the front door. My recollection when my kids were at that age group, you're there for quite a few minutes. It's not just you drop in, you drop off the kid and run. If you have an easygoing kid, it might be one thing. They love to be left alone, get the parents out of the way. If you have a difficult kid who wants to be with mom or dad for a while, they could be there 10 minutes. And we need some testimony on what that will mean to this limited space, because for anybody that pulls into this area, if all the spaces are filled, they have nowhere to go. They've got to make a U-turn in the middle of that 24-foot wide aisle.
And Joe,
testimony about that.
Joe, we will provide testimony. We've also done some extensive studies on the operations at a couple other Primrose locations to get an understanding of how long that drop off and pickup is on average, how many parents are there on average, dropping off and picking up at the same time. And I would just state that again, because I think this was related, we did add basically a hatched area or a hatched space. Again, we're still working on the design of it. We may end up putting it at this top area, but the point is, if you got to the end of this aisle and there were no parking spaces, you at least had a spot to be able to pull into and back out and perform your kind of K-turn instead of doing it within the 24-foot aisle. But again, we are, this was something we put together. I think we had, a couple days between the last hearing and when some of these exhibits needed to get prepared for. So as part of the full redesign, we'll try to ensure that we could have a smooth backup and return out of this parking field if needed. But again, I feel confident in looking at the operations of the other Primrose locations, getting their time in, time out information from their staff as well as their parents. We have an understanding of how many people will be dropping off at one time.
Okay. And one last point. Was there a comment that along this residential property line, there's going to be a 6-foot fence and then a 5-foot landscape strip? And then the parking?
So what we had proposed, and I'm going to zoom in, we have the fence that we had proposed along the property line, and then we had our plantings on our side of the fence, which was in this area, it's actually, I think, about 6 feet off. It's 5 feet off in the area where we have the parallel spaces is the first curb between the property line and the curb. It was our thought to put the landscaping on our side for, I would say, operational and maintenance purposes. But again, if the board or someone wishes that the fence should be reversed and the planting should be on the residential side, we'd have no issue with that. It just is a little bit more of a concern from a maintenance standpoint.
Oh, yeah, because then Mr. Kohut, the adjoining property owner, would have the maintenance on their property. I understand that.
Yeah.
You might want to reach out to that adjoining property owner just to talk to them about that. It would be probably perceived as more aesthetically pleasing for that person rather than looking at a stark fence. And off the top of my head, that was out there a while ago. I just don't recall what's along that property line on their side of the property. But also, we might want to have a conversation with one of our landscape architects to talk about the kind of planting that on either side of the fence, we want to make sure that it survives. So we might want to have that conversation before you submit your final submission to the borough, to the city.
And we could do that. And again, that was one of the reasons why we had, if you notice, there are smaller landscape, at least illustration of landscape in the area where we have the 5-foot offset. In the area we have the 6 and almost a half-foot offset, we have a little bit larger landscape feature. But again, I think we could work with your landscape architect on staff to ensure that whatever we're planting is appropriate based on the spacing.
And then 2 last points from our memo. Obviously, you're going to have to justify the parking shortfall.
Yep.
You're aware of that. And then when you go through our memo, we had a number of comments about C1 versus C2 variances. And there was some reference to secret criteria because this is an inherently beneficial use, but this is not a D variance.
Correct.
That information was supposed to be just as information for the board, because when Tom Behrens from my office was doing the DRO with this board, there was a lot of discussion about that, I gather. So he wanted just to give them some information, not for you to think you have to address that issue as a part of the criteria.
Agreed, Joe. And I think that again, while I concur that the Sika test is for a non-permitted use or a D variance, I do think at least some of the maneuvers or some of the changes that we're proposing here as part of this application, again, I think are things the applicant is looking at in terms of, even if this was a Sika case, in terms of reasonable changes or reasonable restrictions on a property for inherently beneficial uses. But I agree. I don't think we have to meet the full Sika threshold here.
Yeah, it just doesn't apply.
Right.
Very good. I have nothing else, Mr. Chairman.
Can I ask a question? Bill?
You're on mute, Mr. Chairman.
So sorry, Mr. Dorr, Chris Dorr, are you up? Any questions behind Mr. Burgess? Then I think we have another question. Was that you, Rich?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did have a question regarding the playground area and the adjacent property. They moved the fence back 3 feet. Was there a discussion, or did you mention that you were going to be planting in that area or not?
I think we would look to, again, we didn't, unfortunately, it does not look like the red line showed the planting, but it was our intention to show 3 foot of landscape area, if possible, in that area.
Okay, and the fencing along that adjacent property, you're going to be putting 6 foot fencing in along there as well, correct?
I believe that was previously testified to, yes,
Okay.
between our property line and the landscape, 15-foot landscape buffer, yes.
Right, and I know that the neighbor was concerned about people walking through there. Is there any potential for putting up a fence to prevent that from happening?
You're saying on this spot, I'd say closest to Webster, so no one kind of walks through?
Correct.
Yep. We have no issue with that if that's something the board wishes to see. Again, I don't know if you would want that to be full board on, a full fence, or if you want that to have some visibility through for safety, security purposes. But again, I don't think we would have a concern one way or the other.
Yeah,
there's a tree here, so that'd be the one thing. Obviously, the fence, you don't want it going through the physical part of the tree. But
and the fence could be at either end. It either could be on that or the parking lot end.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and then the concern that I had, which you somewhat addressed, was as far as having a dead end aisle in that parking area. So the cars that have to turn around will have an area, and that space that you show is number 9, or the 9 spaces. That would also function if it was striped off. You'd eliminate a space, but it would also function for backing out.
Yeah, and again, we could look at even maybe a partial hammerhead here or something to kind of make it a little bit easier to turn around if you made it to the end.
Right. And the question that Mr. Burgess brought up as far as the trash and recycling was a good one, because I was going to ask that too, because we talked about trash, but there was no discussion as far as recycling. So I assume that the facility will be complying with the state and the city standards as far as recycling and trash.
Yes, and again, the intention was, again, we're showing 6 cans here. We were planning it being 4 for trash and 2 for recycling. But again, it sounds like we want to hear, or the board would like to hear, some testimony regarding the amount of trash and recycling that's generated, and how that both the office user and the child care facility would be, utilizing those bins, and how often pickup would have to occur.
Okay. The other question I had is with the parking space coming off of Morris Avenue with the Mini Cooper that's going to be parked there. Is there going to be an issue with the monument sign for site visibility? I'd like you to also address that in your when you do your redesign.
Okay, certainly.
Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Dora. Rich, Mr. Fiore?
Yeah, so what is the estimate of volume of cars going into this lot over periods of time? Do you have an analysis of that? And was that, yeah.
That's within the traffic study, and I probably, again, could talk for an hour.
Yeah, I mean, but they're not, it's not mutually exclusive to what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I mean, everything we're talking about is based on volume going into that lot over periods of time.
Yes,
You really
and
don't know how many cars are going in at any one point, because all of this is moot if you've got a multitude of cars going in, during a limited period of time.
right, and again, we provided capacity analysis at that driveway, the entry driveway, as well as some discussion about the trip generation, the parking generation, the types of parkers, the frequency of parents dropping off and picking up, which will be, like I said, a pretty extensive testimony at the next hearing. And I know if I start testifying to it now, we're just going to lead to probably more questions.
It's fair enough. I just don't think, justice is not done to this unless that's brought into the discussion.
Absolutely. And this
the
board
other
will hear that.
variable here is, as a parent who's, thankfully been through this process and done with it, you're going to have a large number of folks, I would imagine, that say, you know what, I'm not dealing with the parking lot and I'm going to the side street, I'm parking, I'm dealing with the car seat, and I'm walking my child in from the side street. I mean, that's just reality. I'm just throwing it out there. It's just a practical reality that's going to occur.
All right. Thanks for
Either way, I think either way, you're dealing with the parking lot, whether you're pulling in or having to walk through it.
Well, you can
from
walk on
parking on the
you can
street.
walk on the sidewalk and come around, but you're going to have a large number of folks that if there's issues with the parking lot, which from what I'm hearing, again, we'll wait to hear what the traffic study shows, but they're just not going to deal with going into the parking lot. They're going to go to the side street and park. That's just practical. That's what's going to happen.
All right. Thanks, Rich. Anybody else on the board or the board consultants?
Bill, I just want to, Mr. Chairman, can I just follow up quickly on Chris's question?
Sure.
Back onto that side over by the playground.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Sackler, I think one of the concerns that the neighborhood has, obviously, is the height of the play set and people having to look down into this from their second floor bedrooms, et cetera. And so the residential neighbor directly next to that is now having to look down on that. The landscape buffering, you've got two dots there that are trees. What are the circles and X's? Because I think if you planted trees that grew 30, 40 feet that are nice, and again, you work with Mr. Burgess and the landscape and the forester, I think you provide a buffer that the neighbor now does not have to look into the building and the play set, and it also provides a sound buffer. So other than the two black dots that look like trees, what are the X's and the circles? Are they small bushes?
Yeah, so the two dot trees, those are existing trees. So these are full grown mature trees. The remainder of the trees, and again, I'm not a landscape architect, so I may be butchering the name of these things, but one of them appears to be a American holly, and then there are 8 American arborvitaes along that stretch. In addition, what we just proposed was that the 3 feet planting area, and again, you're not going to get like a great oak tree in this 3 feet buffer, but we are looking at planting on this high side of the wall some trees as well, but I would say some vegetation.
Right. I would suggest you consider taking the arborvitaes out, which are not healthy trees, and actually reconsider the giant ones on the side and work with Mr. Burgess. But I would suggest in that 15-foot buffer, you find some nice big trees. And I know that the forester is wanting to plant trees because we've had to take down the ones that have had the disease and all of that. I would suggest you find some nice big pretty trees and you plant them in there and provide a buffer to the residential neighborhood. Because right now, arborvitaes and a 6-foot fence is nice. And I applaud you guys for reacting to the public's concerns. But that 15-foot buffer, that is directly, that neighbor's house is on that property. And I don't think that they should be looking from the second floor window into a playset. And I think you could easily plant some trees there that would alleviate that.
And again, we would be happy because again, we're flexible with the trees or the plants that are being utilized for landscape here. So again, we'd be happy to work with whether it's the forester or Mr. Burgess's office and
Thank
look
you.
to match that.
Thank you. And I don't have any more questions because we want to invite you back.
All right, any other
Just
members?
one, yeah, this is Matt Delory again, sorry. Just real quick, so will we be seeing the renderings RE-3 with the plantings? Are those going to be adjusted to accommodate so that the public can see what those will look like with your changes?
I don't know if that's my answer, Craig. I don't know if that might
Yeah,
be,
we'll work to adjust the renderings. Those will probably be more exhibits that will be uploaded, probably a few days before the hearing, just like we did previously. I think the focus is initially getting the actual site plan application, and then the demonstrative exhibits will be uploaded a few days before.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we've included a lot of comments there, Mr. Giannetti, and hopefully that was helpful to you and Mr. Seckler. I think it's now time to take a break, give our court reporter a 10-minute break or 12-minute break, and get back. And where's our reporter? Up there somewhere. Melissa, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, what works well for you? I know you've been at it for 2 hours now.
10 is fine.
Okay, all right, we'll take a 10-minute break. And Mr. Giannetti, I guess at that point, if there's any summary that Mr. Seckler wants to do, or you want to go into your operational witness, we can go on from there. There'll be no questions from the public regarding Mr. Seckler's testimony. All right, okay, we'll take a 10 minutes break and reconvene at 9:38. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lily was making noises. I said she wanted mom time. She was hitting her and telling Kate, pulling her hand to put her up on the seat and then on the sofa. And then she wanted her on the sofa. I said she wants some mommy time. And then she picked up Kate's shirt.
Mr. Giannetti,
Yes.
I don't see Mr. Seckler. He's not on my screen at the moment, but when he comes back on, either I can ask him or if you can ask him just to slow down a little bit. He's kind of blown me out of the water.
I see him and I see him smiling. He's on mute, so he's got the message loud and clear.
Got it.
You're not the first
Okay.
reporter to tell me that.
If we were in the same room, it would be a different story.
And Mr. Seckler, you're not being invited back now.
I don't know what I'll do with those hours next month.
Watch Monday Night Football. It's a good game, apparently.
Well, is everybody back? More or less?
Mr. Chairman, if we could take a roll call just to confirm?
Yep. Yes, Mr. Nicola.
Sure. Chairman Anderson?
Present.
Vice Chairman Brinkerhoff?
Here.
Councilmember Little?
Here.
Ms. Paulson Alvarez? Her screen is currently muted. We'll get back to her.
Always a problem, Jennifer.
McNeil?
Here.
Mr. Delory?
Here.
Zucker?
Here.
Mr. Perella?
Here.
Mr. Delory?
Here.
And Mr. Formicelli?
I'm here.
And I'm back.
And Ms. Paulson Alvarez is here. All right, we got quorum. We can proceed.
All right. Mr. Gianelli, you have your team assembled and ready to go?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and as discussed earlier in the evening, I think at this point, we've given the board a sneak peek of the plan changes, and we appreciate the opportunity to present it as well as get some kind of initial feedback from the board and the board professionals as we revise the site plan and get it submitted, obviously in time for the next meeting. And just from a, presentation standpoint and kind of, making it a little more fluid and have continuity, we think it would make most sense at the next meeting. We're going to present this revised plan along with the operations related to that revised plan with the planning and traffic testimony from Mr. Seckler as well. And then open those two witnesses up to public questioning as to their testimony, and hopefully at that point get to public comment as well. But I think for purposes of what we wanted to achieve tonight, we've presented the sneak peek plan and have gotten the feedback, and we will work on updating those site plans, getting them in advance of the next meeting, well in advance, so we meet the not only the statutory requirement, but also giving professionals enough time to review them as well. So we wouldn't have anything further for tonight's meeting.
Okay, all right, that's understood. All right, I think that will go well, having them all present and then opening it up to the public for questions. I think that'll work well. And hopefully we can conclude at the next meeting at that point. So if that's the case, Mr. Gianelli, the board has one item left, and that is the Beechwood at Summit LLC is requesting to be carried. Mr. Nicola, anything that you would want to add to that?
Do you want to
Well, I
carry?
guess we need to have our meeting, announcing the date of the next meeting.
Thank you,
Oh,
Mr.
yes, sure,
Giannetti.
sorry.
And also, Mr. Chairman, I just note that Mr. Nicola maybe could confirm, it looks as if there might be one hand raised at the attendees, and I don't know if it's a procedural question or something that someone may have, although maybe that just disappeared off my screen.
Disappear.
So never mind, but yes, so if we can, Mr. Giannetti, this matter is going to be carried to the next meeting. Chris, the date, time, and the remote location?
November 23rd?
Yes, Mr. Chairman's correct. It's November 23rd at 7:30 PM, our regularly scheduled time.
Okay, and that'll be without further notice, and that will be this remote access Zoom meeting. The particular codes to be provided at least 48 hours in advance on the website, correct, Chris?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Chairman, members of the board.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Giannetti.
Mr. Giannetti, we may have a time to extend through the end of the month of November in writing already. Not to be pessimistic, but just to be out of an abundance of caution, perhaps we can be provided one a little further, maybe even through the end of December, just in case.
Well, I don't want you to jinx it, but maybe I can send you something in writing.
There you go. Good enough. Thank you. I apologize for interrupting, Mr. Chairman.
No, I'm shaking my head because I would like to get this done before the end of the year.
Okay. I withdraw my request for a time to act. We'll leave it at the end of November and push it. I'm sure we won't forget if we need it in November.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mr. Giannetti. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right. So one last thing before we adjourn tonight. The request by the applicant at Beechwood at Summit LLC to be carried. And I didn't know if Mr. Nicola, you wanted to give us any further information on that, or Mr. Weber had any comments on that, but that's the request we have in front of us to carry that forward.
Mr. Maynor and his team have finally provided the revised plans that we've been waiting for. So I think we should have staff reviews ready for the November hearing, at which point, depending on how this application goes, maybe we can hear it. But if not, that's pretty much where we're at. So staff is currently going to be working to provide all the comments for everybody.
Okay. All right. So we'll hear that maybe in the 23rd, perhaps.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just clarify, that again is with further notice. The applicant will have to provide further notice. That's important, number one. Number two, it's important we carry it to a date, time, and place certain, not only for current purposes, but also for the applicant to provide that further notice. So I might turn it back, if I may, to Chris. Do we have at least a reasonable possibility that it can be heard on November 23rd, in which case that should be the date, and that's what the applicant should renotice for?
Well, like I said, we're going to hear this first. So this would be second on that agenda. I think we can put it for November 23rd, and Mr. Maynor can notice accordingly for that. And then if he renotices the board and we don't get to him, the board could carry them without further notice to December.
That's
So
correct. If the chair finds that acceptable.
That makes
then-
sense. Sure. Yep. That works.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So I hate to ask the board for this, but will someone make a motion to adjourn?
The lady in Paris.
All right.
I'll make the motion.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. And a second, please.
Seconded.
Great. Thanks, John. Thank you all very much. I know this format has been really trying, and it's really a challenge to get through all this. We got a little bit of a break tonight at 9:46. I feel like I've got half a day left. But anyway, we'll try to keep this thing moving, and hopefully we can get it resolved, completed hearing and everything else by the end of next meeting, so we can go back to quasi-normal routine perhaps. But thank you all very much, and we'll see you in a month.
Thanks, Bill.
Hey, thank you. Be well,
Right,
everyone.
thanks.
Guys.
Good night, everyone.
Everyone.